She didn't scream, she didn't cheat, but somehow she broke you, not with violence, with tactics, because low-value women don't use fists, they use emotional patterns, psychological pressure, quiet tricks that turn confident men into confused shells of who they used to be. And here's what makes it dangerous. It doesn't happen in a day. It happens in patterns, in guilt you didn't earn, in conversations that leave you doubting yourself every time. You'll start explaining yourself more. You'll start questioning whether you're too sensitive, too demanding, too cold. You'll wonder why you're always the one apologizing, always the one trying harder, always the one bending while she keeps pushing. And just like that, you're not in a relationship. You're in a control loop, a cycle she's designed, not always on purpose, but always to keep the power tilted in her favor. This is how low-value women manage strong men, not through domination, but through confusion. And by the time you wake up, you've already given her the one thing you can never get back: your emotional leverage. This isn't hate. This is clarity. And in this video, we're going to expose the 8 psychological tricks low-value women use to keep high-value men under control. Some are subtle. Some are so twisted you won't believe you tolerated them. But by the end of this video, you'll never be fooled by them again. And here's the part that matters most. These tactics are going to escalate, from subtle emotional pressure to full-blown identity attacks that can destroy your confidence if you let them. Each point hits harder than the one before. And by the final one, you'll understand exactly why high-value men stop explaining and start walking away. This is episode 3 of the 4-part series built for men who are done being managed, manipulated, or emotionally twisted into submission. No more excuses, no more silence, no more playing nice with psychological warfare. Let's get into it. 1. She plays the victim to avoid accountability. It starts small. She forgets something. She snaps at you. She crosses a boundary. And when you bring it up, calmly, clearly, she doesn't take ownership. She breaks down. Tears, silence, emotional collapse. Suddenly, you're the one apologizing, not for what you did, but for how your truth made her feel. This is the first trick. She plays the victim to avoid accountability. And at first it doesn't seem manipulative. You think she's just sensitive, that she's had a rough past, that she needs comfort and patience. But that pattern never ends. She makes a mistake. You comfort her. She lashes out. You soften your voice. She crosses a line. And somehow, you feel guilty for setting one in the first place. Over time, your sense of right and wrong starts to erode. You begin to filter your words, downplay your needs, and hold back your reactions, just to protect her from having to face herself. That's not love. That's manipulation with a tear-stained face. Low-value women do this because it works, because emotional collapse gets them what they want: sympathy, power, control without confrontation. And if you keep falling for it, here's what happens. You stop holding her accountable. You stop expressing your boundaries. You start doing emotional labor for two, carrying both your truth and her denial. That's how strong men become emotionally exhausted, not from yelling or fighting, but from slowly being conditioned to believe that truth equals cruelty. But high-value men, they see through it. They understand that emotional fragility is not an excuse to avoid growth, that crying doesn't equal correction, that discomfort isn't a reason to avoid the truth. So they speak with clarity and stand on it. They don't back down because someone's uncomfortable, because they know. You can't build a future with someone who hides from the present. And the moment a woman turns every conversation into a wound, she's not trying to grow. She's trying to control the narrative. And when she can't twist your words, she'll try something else. She'll make you feel like the villain, not for what you did, but for what you didn't give. 2. She uses guilt as a leash. She doesn't need to raise her voice to control you. She just needs you to feel bad about being yourself. You set a boundary, and she goes quiet. You take time for yourself, and she sighs. You challenge her behavior, and she hits you with a trembling voice. I just didn't think you'd treat me like this. You didn't yell. You didn't insult her. You simply disagreed. And now you're the villain in a story that never existed. This is the guilt leash. And once it's around your neck, you stop walking freely and start tiptoeing through every interaction. You change your tone. You question your words. You give more than you have, not because she asked, but because she made you feel bad for giving less. And here's the trap. The guilt doesn't come from what you did. It comes from how she framed what you didn't do. You don't care about me. You've changed. You used to be different. Suddenly, you're explaining yourself for prioritizing your peace. You're apologizing for having standards. You're defending your need for space, for clarity, for truth, like it's a crime. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the worse it gets. Because the guilt isn't about fixing anything, it's about controlling everything. Low-value women understand that guilt is a quiet force. It doesn't break walls. It dissolves your spine. And once she knows that your empathy is stronger than your boundaries, she owns you. High-value men don't fall for that. They know guilt is a tool. And if it's showing up every time they speak truth, it's not love anymore. It's conditioning. So they listen. They observe. They spot the shift from emotional honesty to emotional manipulation. And they cut the leash. Because a woman who needs you to feel guilty in order to feel loved doesn't want a relationship. She wants a hostage. And the moment guilt stops working, she doesn't try to fix the relationship. She tries to punish you for standing tall, but she won't do it through confrontation. She'll do it through silence, weaponized and strategic. 3. She punishes you with silence instead of solving the problem. She doesn't yell. She disappears. Not physically, emotionally. The tone shifts, the energy drops. Suddenly you're not in a conversation anymore. You're in a courtroom, but no one tells you what you're on trial for. You walk in the room and feel it instantly. Cold distance, no eye contact, answers reduced to one-word replies. The warmth that once held you, gone. And you start searching. What did I do? What did I say? How do I fix it? That's the trick. Because it's not about what you did. It's about how long she can make you feel bad for not knowing. This is punishment through silence. Not the kind that heals or allows space to reflect, but the kind designed to destabilize you. She doesn't want resolution. She wants power. She wants you to squirm, to question, to chase. And when you do, when you fold, apologize, over-explain, she wins, because now she knows. All she has to do is withdraw, and you'll come running. Low-value women use this tactic because it's clean. No yelling, no fights, no proof of abuse. Just cold detachment wrapped in emotional superiority. And the longer it lasts, the more you panic. You become the one initiating every conversation. You start second-guessing boundaries you had every right to set. You go from man to manager, from leader to emotional janitor, cleaning up messes you didn't make. High-value men recognize this pattern early because they've lived it, and they know how toxic it truly is. They know that mature women communicate. They don't withdraw to manipulate. They don't punish with silence to win invisible battles. So when the energy shifts without explanation, they don't chase, They don't beg. They don't perform for her attention. They detach. Because emotional safety isn't created through fear, and no woman who loves you will ever use silence to make you suffer. And here's what makes it more dangerous. The longer she withholds connection, the more desperate you become. And desperation is where she gains control. And once she controls the emotional tone, she starts controlling the story. Because silence alone isn't enough. Eventually, she has to rewrite what actually happened to protect her position. 4. She rewrites reality in her favor. You remember what happened, what was said, what was promised. But when you bring it up, she looks confused, as if you're the one getting it wrong, as if the truth is flexible. That's not what I meant. You're twisting my words. I never said that. And suddenly, you're the one defending something that actually happened. This is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks low-value women use. Rewriting reality. Not in loud, obvious ways, in subtle distortions. Tiny edits to memory. Small shifts in tone, context, or timelines that make you question your own perception. It doesn't just mess with your trust in her. It messes with your trust in yourself. You start wondering if you're being too sensitive. You replay conversations in your head. You second-guess your reactions, your standards, your clarity. And that's exactly the goal. Because the more confused you are about what actually happened, the easier it is for her to control what happens next. If she can convince you that your truth is flawed, then she becomes the authority of truth in the relationship. That's not communication. That's narrative warfare. Low-value women use this when they're losing ground. When the facts no longer work in their favor, they don't adjust behavior. They adjust the facts. And here's what makes it worse. You start internalizing the confusion. You start walking on mental eggshells. You hesitate to speak up, not because you're wrong, but because you've been trained to expect denial, deflection, or dismissal. High-value men know better. They know that when truth becomes negotiable, trust becomes impossible. They don't argue with manipulated memory. They don't debate their own clarity just to keep the peace. They trust their gut. They trust the evidence. And they trust themselves, even if no one else in the relationship does. Because once a woman starts rewriting reality, she's not trying to understand you. She's trying to win against you. And the man who keeps tolerating that, he'll never feel grounded again. But that's only half the tactic. Because after she twists the facts, she makes you feel like it's your fault she's unhappy, even when you're giving everything. And that's the next level of control, making you feel like you're failing no matter what you do. 5. She makes you feel like you're failing no matter what you do. You give more time, more attention, more energy. You show up, you adjust, you sacrifice, and yet somehow, it's never enough. She still seems distant, still criticizes your tone, still finds new reasons to feel unsatisfied. And the worst part? She doesn't scream. She just withholds approval until you feel like you're failing at something you never fully understood. This is the quiet trap low-value women create, a relationship where success is undefined, so you're always chasing, guessing, trying harder, and still falling short. She doesn't say, "You're not enough," but she implies it in everything, in how she compares you, in how she praises others, in how she rarely acknowledges what you do right. And over time, you begin to feel it. The tension, the exhaustion, the growing sense that love is now performance, not connection. You're not building a relationship anymore. You're auditioning for one, and the script keeps changing. Low-value women do this for one reason: control. Because the man who feels like he's constantly one step away from losing her is the man who never stops trying to win her. It's emotional bait and switch. She offers glimpses of approval, just enough to keep you coming back, then pulls it away the moment you relax. That keeps you off balance, keeps you unsure, keeps you working harder, just to feel like you're doing enough. And that's the trick. She doesn't want to receive. She wants to control the rhythm of giving. High-value men catch this pattern early because they understand a simple truth. In a healthy relationship, love isn't earned through exhaustion. It's built through mutual respect. They don't measure connection by how much effort it takes to survive the emotional landmines. They measure it by peace, by clarity, by how seen and respected they feel, not just how useful they are. So when they feel like they're always failing, they stop trying harder and start asking better questions. Because sometimes the issue isn't your effort. It's that she was never capable of being satisfied. But if effort won't keep you, she knows what will. The one thing every man struggles to walk away from: attraction. And that's what she uses next. 6. She weaponizes her beauty and sexuality. She knows exactly what you like, how to look at you, how to touch you, how to pull you back in, even after a storm she created. And when things get tense, she doesn't always argue, she doesn't always apologize. Sometimes, she just shows up looking perfect. Soft, sweet, seductive. It's not connection, it's control. Because low-value women learn early. If they can't win with logic, they'll win with beauty. If they can't meet your standards, they'll distract you from them. So now, affection is a reward. Physical touch becomes a prize. And your attraction, your raw masculine hunger, becomes the one string she can pull anytime you start pulling away. You begin to associate peace with passion, disagreement with distance, and pleasure with permission to forget the chaos. This is how she trains you. You speak up, she withdraws. You challenge her, she shuts down. But the moment you comply, relax, or play along, she returns, open arms, soft voice, eyes that say, "See? We're okay now." But you're not okay. Because deep down, you know this isn't love. It's manipulation wearing lingerie. And the more you crave the moments of warmth, the more you tolerate the moments of damage. That's how powerful beauty can be when it's used against you. It hijacks your logic. It slows your exit. It turns your standards into shadows and your backbone into something bendable. High-value men see through this. They understand that beauty without maturity is a trap. That attraction should never override alignment, and that any woman who uses intimacy as leverage isn't interested in connection. She's interested in control. So they stop associating beauty with value. They stop rewarding manipulation with obedience. And they stop chasing women who use their bodies to avoid accountability. Because once you need her body more than she respects your mind, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in a performance, written by her and funded by your need for approval. And when she sees that beauty no longer controls you, she doesn't surrender. She confuses you, hot and cold, closer than distant. Which brings us to her next move, keeping you emotionally off balance until you're addicted to the chase. 7. She keeps you off balance with mixed signals. One day, she's all in, affectionate, engaged, vulnerable, telling you how much you mean to her, how safe she feels with you. The next day, she's distant, dry, dismissive. You feel like you're talking to a stranger, and when you ask what's wrong, she says, "Nothing. You're overthinking." That's not moodiness. That's emotional manipulation. Low-value women use mixed signals to create instability, not because they're confused, but because you become easier to control when you're the one seeking clarity. It's strategic, because the moment you stop feeling safe in her presence, you start craving the version of her that gave you warmth. You start chasing consistency, not because she's good for you, but because you just want the emotional chaos to stop. This is where most men get trapped. They don't realize they're no longer in a relationship. They're in a psychological loop, one where they're trained to associate tension with love, unpredictability with desire, and it's powerful because the highs feel like euphoria, but the lows, they wreck your nervous system. One sweet moment makes you forget 5 days of tension. One kiss erases a week of distance, and slowly your standards fall, all in the name of chasing what you used to feel. High-value men don't live in that loop. They don't confuse emotional addiction with compatibility. They don't mistake inconsistency for mystery. They see the pattern and walk the moment the game begins. Because they know something most men learn too late. Any woman who controls your peace through unpredictability isn't loving you. She's training you. And once a man becomes emotionally trained to respond to chaos, he stops thinking clearly. He starts fearing silence. He becomes reactive, desperate for reassurance, approval, connection. And that's where she gains full control, not because she's stronger, but because you've forgotten your center. And when you try to reclaim that center, when you finally speak up, set boundaries, hold your frame, she doesn't reflect. She retaliates. She questions the very core of who you are. 8. She questions your masculinity. When you stand up for yourself, she was fine when you were quiet, when you tolerated the drama, when you explained yourself over and over just to keep the peace. But the moment you draw a line, the moment you say no, the moment you stop reacting and start reclaiming your frame, she flips. Suddenly, you're controlling. You're emotionally unavailable. You're not man enough to handle her. This is the final card low-value women play when they start losing control. They attack your masculinity because she knows what cuts deep. She knows that respect is the foundation of your identity. And if she can't get you to obey through guilt, silence, or seduction, she'll try to break your self-image. You're cold. You're not strong. You're just insecure. No real man would treat a woman like this. It's not an argument anymore. It's a character assassination. She doesn't challenge your behavior. She challenges who you are, hoping to trigger your need to prove yourself. And if you take the bait, you fall right back into her control. You start defending your masculinity. You try to show her you're emotionally available, compassionate, balanced. You explain, validate, and soften, not for peace, but to get her approval. That's not power. That's submission wrapped in confusion. High-value men never explain their strength. They don't argue about being men. They embody it. They know that when a woman feels threatened by a man's clarity, leadership, and boundaries, she'll try to reduce his power by mocking the very thing that makes him grounded. But a strong man doesn't flinch when a woman's ego feels uncomfortable. He doesn't question his masculinity just because she lost her grip. Because he knows a woman who only respects you when she controls you was never attracted to strength, only submission. And the moment he stops submitting, she turns on him. That's when he knows the truth. She was never looking for a man. She was looking for someone she could reshape. And high-value men don't get reshaped. They walk calmly, decisively, without negotiation. Because when a woman attacks your masculinity, she's already declared war on your identity. And any man who tolerates that will eventually forget who he is. Now, you see the pattern. Not just the behaviors, but the system. The way low-value women twist emotion into control, affection into leverage, silence into power. And maybe you saw pieces of your past in every tactic. Maybe this video didn't just describe a woman, it described an era of your life, one you survived, but never fully understood, until now. Because that's what clarity does. It pulls you out of the emotional fog and reminds you, you were never weak. You were just manipulated. And now you know better. High-value men don't play defense in relationships. They lead, they set the frame, and they walk the moment that frame is disrespected. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much about their mission, their focus, their peace. If this hits something in you, that's not a wound. It's a wake-up call. This is episode 3 of the 4-part series we created for men like you. Men who've seen the emotional warfare. Men who are tired of second-guessing themselves. Men who are done being reshaped, manipulated, or silently drained by women who lack maturity, but wear the mask of love. The next episode, it goes deeper, sharper. It doesn't just expose her patterns. It shows you how to become unbreakable in the face of them. Because this isn't about running from manipulation. It's about becoming immune to it. When a man stops explaining his value, he becomes impossible to manipulate. Remember that, not just today, but the next time chaos comes dressed as connection.